Was it really a snake? In 1 Samuel 17, we find the story of David and Goliath. In this story, we're introduced to a Philistine named Goliath, who is described as like a giant. Goliath is terrorizing the people of Israel, causing all sorts of chaos and disorder. Now, most of you are probably familiar with the story, and many of you are probably actually trying to figure out what this has to do with Genesis 3. Hold on to that for a moment. Even maybe a smaller portion, you'll probably have checked to see if you're even watching the right video. Let me rest assured you are. You're watching the right video. Second, I chose to discuss this story to hopefully activate images in your mind. And for many of you, you probably have mental pictures of David slinging his stone at Goliath. I mean, every time we hear the slingshot or a sling, we probably immediately think of David, or at least this incident. And we hear giants. Maybe the first giant that you ever think of as a kid is Goliath. So you have mental pictures, strong mental pictures already from this passage. The point I'm trying to make is when we gather knowledge, we typically tend to store it and remember it. At least that's our hope, right? Most of you probably do it way better than I do. The fact is, when we hear or see things we are familiar with, our minds begin to drop those images for us. That's just how our mind functions. Many of us, like I said, even hear the word slingshot, and bam, I got David there. I got David there. The point is, this story, which you call the David and Goliath story, has some very powerful images. It's a great story. But what we need to see is that many of these images or ideas told in this David and Goliath story have powerful roots in Genesis 3. Yeah, Genesis 3, the fall. Ideas that we may not see in our English translation due to the river of time in the language which separates the two stories and honestly our current context. The fact is, the original audience of 1 Samuel would see some very, very powerful connections to Genesis 3 that honestly, with the way our English is and the way our structure is, we just don't. So let me tell you a little bit more about, let's review that 1 Samuel 17. Let me give you some more background on it again. The Philistines are a sea people. They come from across the great chaotic seas of the Mediterranean. They come from across it, where all the sea beasts are thought of coming from. So these are even people who worship the sea beast. Their gods are forms of sea beasts. You can almost picture if you're familiar with Daniel, the sea beast coming out of the water, Revelation. These are people who come from those seas. Not to mention Goliath is a large man, a giant like the Nephilim that we saw, which were part beast, if you know what the Nephilim are. And in the narrative is detailed that Goliath wears shimmering, bronze-scaled armor and is shouting lies to God's elect people. And sadly, what we see in this passage is all the people, with the exception of young David, a person who, in the chapter right before in 1 Samuel, was anointed by Samuel to be God's leader, all are falling for the lies of the snake-like creature, except David. Sound familiar? If not, perhaps it will. In order, let me demonstrate. Let's dive straight into Genesis 3. In Genesis 3, we find a being is present who freely chooses to oppose God's plan for his elect, a heavenly-like being. This being, this Nacash, freely chooses to oppose God's plan for humanity. The word Nacash is a Hebrew word for snake. Now, in Hebrew, there are actually multiple words for serpents, quite a bit. And this is quite odd considering the Hebrew language uses one word for multiple meanings. However, that being said, this specific word is used, and that's key because this word has multiple other meanings as well. So what I want us to understand, this otherworldly being is masquerading as or is presented as a snake or a serpent. And again, as mentioned a moment ago, all the ancient Near East ideas, these dragons or serpents are representations of chaos monsters. They are definitely unclean, non-kosher. Also significant, again, is the word itself, Nacash. The word Nacash can activate three different things. And literally, I believe this is what's going on here. Theologian Michael Heiser's research points out that the Hebrew word for this word, Nacash, is the basis for a noun, a verb, and an adjective. I don't know how well you are remembering those things from high school English, but they're three distinctly different things. In other words, the word can be seen threefold: as a snake, as for the verb as a deceiver, and for the adjective bronze, brass, or shining one. And this word is more than likely chosen because it's meant to activate all three images and ideas to the original audience. So snake, deceiver, and bronze shining one all mixed together. For one, it saves space. And you need a lot of space to conserve space when you're writing on these parchments. But the point is, we shouldn't just look at it as one. We should see all three parts coming together here: the noun, the verb, and the adjective. So what we see here is a snake-looking, shimmering, deceiving heavenly being. Okay, it's this serpentine heavenly being that talks to Eve. It could be that this being was a seraphim or a cherubim, because the root for the word seraphim or seraph is also another word for serpent. It's these seraphim that are seen flying around the throne room in Isaiah 6, saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord." But I digress. I digress. The word is Nacash here. The point is, Eve, in talking to the Nacash, is aware that this crafty being is more than just an animal. It's more than just an animal. Hence, why neither she or Adam are overly stunned when the snake is talking to them. In the deeper dive section below, more time is spent on examining Ezekiel and idea in regards to the shining or bronze-like shimmering nature of angelic beings. However, for now, we need to understand that this crafty, wise being was distinctly serpentine, angelic, and don't forget deceptive. Deceiver is a key thing throughout all of Genesis and throughout all of Scripture. And sadly, as Genesis 3 points out, Eve and Adam believe this deceiver's lies. Now let's return back to 1 Samuel 17, where we find Goliath, this chaos-bringing Philistine from the sea, is wearing shimmering, bronze-scaled, serpentine-like armor and is shouting lies about God to God's image-bearing Israelites, the elected people of God at this time. And these chosen people by God include kings and priests. Kings and priests are falling for these lies and living in fear. They foolishly believe this serpentine-like being. He's telling lies about Yahweh, and they, like Adam and Eve, believe these lies. So this picture is activated to 1 Samuel audience when they hear or read this passage. They see Israelites like Adam and Eve are being deceived by a crafty, deceiving, chaos-bringing rebel. Fortunately for them, David, an Adam type, an anointed king, a person elected by God, shows up and refuses to hear the lies of this foul-mouthed serpentine giant. He then goes on to crush the head of the scaly armored Goliath, thereby crushing the head of the serpent and showing he is the picture of the elect of God. Spoiler alert, the skull-crushing seed of the woman is seen in Genesis 3:15. That being said, the skull-crushing seed of the woman is for another study. But the point I want us to see here is where Adam and Eve will fall prey to the craftiness of the snake, David will succeed. Therefore, David is a better Adam. At least, again, another spoiler, for a while. But again, that's another story. The point is, these images are strong. David is an Adam-like person. Is he the one? So the question remains, in Genesis 3, was it really a snake? The answer, it was a Nacash. Yes, it was a heavenly serpent deceiver. An adjective, a noun, and a verb all rolled into one. There's no reason to think otherwise. The being was a Nacash. And this is a key type in Scripture. This Nacash deceiver type will be seen again and again at lesser levels, maybe not at the Luciferian level or the saint-like level, but will be seen again and again throughout Scriptures, not only in the form of Goliath, but in other deceivers, in other serpentine figures, from Pharaoh to Jonadab. The point is, the category of the chaos bringer, the Satan, is established here as a key theme, the adversary here in Genesis 3. And we just need to be ready to see these cursed peace and order breakers arise throughout future narratives and recognize that's the adversary, that's the Satan, that's the Nacash. So in closing, don't forget to take a close read as you study the Scriptures. You never know what emerge with your study. God bless.